Hi, my name is Josh. You're about to watch a session from L.E.A.D Advance with Dr. Tom Farrell and Dr. Ollila. L.E.A.D seeks to encourage those in ministry to partner together with those in their church that are in the secular workplace to reach their community with the gospel. In this session, Dr. Ollila talks about creating an atmosphere that allows us to serve with a happy spirit. And now, here's Dr. Ollila.
On your sheets, you're turned to the sheet called Happy Servant. One of the things on learning leadership principles, and Tom is very clearly expositing Nehemiah, but study the books of the Old Testament and study the leaders for leadership principles. To me, the greatest book on leadership in the Old Testament is the book of Numbers. And one year in my read-through, I had one theme I looked for, and that was leadership. And I was amazed at how many leadership principles were learned from the book of Numbers. Because normally you try to breeze through the genealogies and you breeze through so many things, but you see when God calls a man, there was a call, there was a cleansing, there was a cloud, there was confrontation, there was complaining. And in every case, you see how God solved through leadership, through distribution of responsibility, of how those problems were solved. And a tremendous book on ministry philosophy is the book of Ezra that is leading up to Nehemiah's time. Because I used to call the Zen Construction Company came out of captivity. Zerubbabel was a temple builder, Ezra a people builder, and Nehemiah a wall builder. So the Zen Construction Company came out of captivity, and each had a role. But Ezra, the people builder, in that book, you see a powerful lesson of what do we put ahead of production. Praise went before production. An altar was built first before one block was laid of the temple. Prayer was put ahead of production because they laid the whole thing out before the Lord. Then principle was put ahead of production. The world came in to offer, say, we want to be a part of this. And Zerubbabel said, nope, this is God's doing. Well, we'll sue you if you don't let us be a part. And the world brought a lawsuit and stopped God's work on the temple for 16 years, stopped dead. But Zerubbabel put principle before production. Because he said, no, God is the center of this. And so how long did you sit for 16 years? And then people were put ahead of production. God sent the peoples were discouraged and down in heart. God sent them 2 prophets. Zechariah said, take heart. Haggai said, take part. Get off your Western hemispheres and get moving. So you had 2, heart feeding and hand challenging. And then purity was put ahead of production. Ezra had the unenviable task of calling in man by man, dealing with the compromises in his life. But I thought that book of Ezra, powerful principles for what needs to be put ahead of production. But normally we think produce, and then we start cutting corners and compromising God's truth. Well, I put that in just as a suggestion for your study as well in that. You know, I wrote a note to myself a few years back in my personal reading when I just started into the book of Joshua. If I am not what I want my people to become, I will become what they are. Good. If I am not what I want my people to become, I will become what they are. And here there were only 2 that left to go to Canaan, only 2 who did not become what the people were. Joshua and Caleb. They never took their eyes off God. Everybody else, all the other leaders, all the other people became what the people were. And they started the fear talk, and they started the talk of we can't. And yet Joshua and Caleb kept focusing, God can do that. And we keep that in mind. And so make sure in our encouraging people, we are personally what we want those people to become under our leadership. Now, let's look in 1 Kings chapter 10, and we look at this topic called Happy Servant. Chapter 10 of 1 Kings, we find a queen of Sheba hearing of this country bumpkin. I think she considered Solomon kind of a country bumpkin. If what I'm hearing about this man is true, I need to go and meet him. She did not believe what she was hearing about his wealth, nor of his wisdom. So she came in verse 1 of chapter 10, and when the queen of Sheba heard of the fame of Solomon concerning, note, the name of the Lord, she came to prove him with hard questions. So here's this world leader, this woman who had tremendous influence, said, I have to go and meet this man. She came to Jerusalem with a very great train, with camels that bear spices, very much gold, precious stones. And when she was come to Solomon, she communed with him of all that was in her heart. And Solomon told her all the questions. There was not anything hid from the king which he told her not. And when the queen of Sheba had seen all the wisdom of Solomon and the house that he built, the meat of his table, the sitting of his servants, and the attendance of his ministers, and their apparel, and his cupbearers, and his ascent by which he went up unto the house of the Lord, there was no more spirit in her. And she said to the king, it is a true report that I heard in mine own land of thy acts and thy wisdom. Howbeit I believed not the words until I came, and when eyes had seen it, and behold, the half was not told me. Thy wisdom and thy prosperity exceeded the fame which I heard. So here she comes. She is bringing a camel train, probably 1,000+ miles. This was not just a quick journey. And I think she was going to impress Solomon with what she had, because she didn't believe what she heard about Solomon. And I'm sure when she pulled up with what she had in front of Solomon's place, she was so humbled, probably told her men, hide this behind maintenance, I'm embarrassed. Because she was going to impress him. But what happened? What was the whole key here? She was impressed and was giving glory to the God of Solomon. And that's, those of you who are in the secular business world know when God's good hand is on that work, and when God's good hand is on that, and they're saying, you know, those people honor God with what they have. How can you explain what is going on except that Bible principles are being exercised here? So when she came up, she first tested him with wisdom. And I think when she left, she probably got her wise counselors together and saying, give me some tough questions to ask Solomon. And I'm sure these were not just very casual things. I think they were probably very complicated things. When you study the life of Solomon and everything that God gave him and the wisdom that he had given him, it's pretty amazing. How many people have had the opportunity that Solomon had to God wake you up in the middle of the night and says, ask me anything that you want and I'll give it to you. What did Solomon ask? Wisdom. He said, God, I have been given a responsibility. I don't know how to go out or come in. God, I need wisdom. And God said, because you didn't ask for prosperity, you didn't ask for position, you didn't ask for the life of your enemy, I'm going to give you them as well. Because I remember reading that, I thought, why did God say, because Solomon, you didn't ask for this? Because humanly speaking, when somebody has an opportunity to have anything they want, it starts with prosperity, then it starts with high position, and then it goes to the placation of your wrath against somebody who is attacking. And God said, I'm also going to give that, because with wisdom I can trust you with these other things in that context to do what was to be done. And so there was no spirit left in her. She said, the half hadn't been told me, Solomon. But now let's go to verse the next verse and go to verse 8. Here's my text. Happy are thy men. Happy are these thy servants. Happy servants, that's an oxymoron. All the world leaders had servants, but these world leaders did not have happy servants. Isn't it interesting that in spite of what she saw in the splendor, what she heard in the wisdom, but what stood out in her mind, your people are happy. Your servants are happy. If I walk into your corporation, into your church, into your office, into your Christian school, I walk into complex, what atmosphere is created by that? When you look in Genesis, when man sinned, authority that God set up was turned into anarchy, attitude was turned to accusation, and atmosphere was turned to agitation. Because when I sense an atmosphere is traced back to attitude. Attitude traced back to relationship to authority. That's a given. And so when Adam chose to go against God's authority, there was an attitude change, and from that attitude change, he went down to an atmosphere change. You can only picture the difference between what it was before the fall versus after the fall. And here, God goes to Adam, said, Adam, what have you done? He goes to, with an attitude of blame, his wife. And so when you look at a corporate structure, you look at an office structure, when I walk into this church, for example, there's an instant sense, whether it's among the staff or here, there's an instant sense of a atmosphere that is a happy servant atmosphere. That doesn't just happen. Now, happy are these thy servants which stand continually before thee and that hear thy wisdom. Blessed be the Lord thy God which delights in thee to set thee on the throne of Israel. Again, to whom does she give glory? To the God of Solomon. Now the God of Solomon had instructed Solomon very clearly, don't multiply horses, they'll become a false security. And don't multiply women, they'll turn your heart to idolatry. You think a man with all the wisdom that had been given to him and all of the prosperity that had been given to him would have never turned. But it wasn't a gush into disobedience. It was a drifting. Well, I get more horses. Those of you who go through Israel on tours, you go through Solomon's stables. You still do. You can look from there down into Megiddo. And women, 700 wives and 300 combines. That's a big farm by anybody's standard. And what kind of wisdom is that? Jack Hyles did not start the bus ministry. Solomon did to get his wives to the mall. That's not in the Hebrew. But how do you get happy servants? I want to give 3 quick things here. Now remember, Solomon put heavy tax burdens on these people. And yet there was still this happy atmosphere in there. The kingdom splits. And Jeroboam's son, Solomon's son Jeroboam takes the north, and his son Rehoboam takes the south. And we pick up the story now in 1 Kings chapter 12. After the kingdom has now split, now there are 2 leaders, Jeroboam and Rehoboam. Rehoboam takes the southern kingdom. And we'll pick up the story there in verse 5. And he said unto them, depart yet for 3 days, then come again unto me. And all the people departed. And King Rehoboam consulted with the old men that stood before Solomon his father while he yet lived. So what did Rehoboam do? He said, now what I want to do is I want to meet with all the older people who worked for my dad in this corporate structure. I want to talk to the older people who were in that structure. And he said, how do you advise that I answer these people? So picture this room full of servants. Solomon now has passed on. Rehoboam is given the responsibility of the south. Now he says, get all of the old men who worked for Dad. I want to meet with them. And he said, how do you advise? I am now Rehoboam meeting with you in a staff meeting. I have been given the kingship here. How would you recommend that I lead? Now let's look. Verse 7. And they spake unto him, saying, if thou wilt be a servant unto this people this day, and will serve them. Number one principle here is the principle of servitude. If you will be a servant unto them. Principle of servitude is the key here. Servant leadership. Solomon, in all of his issues, served his people. Now, there are many ways that you can develop a servant mentality, but it begins with the heart of servitude. Manipulators, smoozers can get people to serve them, but you don't end up with a long-term benefit of that. Solomon literally served the people. There are many ways you can serve your people. Number one, keep them on your prayer list. You're in your school, or you're in your church, or you're in your corporation, you're in your workplace, whatever that is. One good way to serve those people is to keep all of those people on your prayer list, so that when you see them, you can say, hey, I appreciate you being here. I'm praying for you. Another way is take time aside and make a time aside to take each lead person out for an evening away. Pay for a babysitter and take some of your key lead people out and serve them. I remember I used to examine the high pressure times of the semesters, and I used to tell Dr. Ardell Jaco, I said, Doc, pick in our academic program when departments are under the greatest pressure. English department, midterm, grading papers, a lot of things, staying up all night, drinking coffee and Jolt. A lot of pressures come during that time. Let's do something to serve them and let them know we know what you're going through. We know you're staying up all night grading papers. We know this. So let's take them out for supper. Let's pick a nice steakhouse or a nice place to go and just serve them in that way. Say, we know what you're going through. We don't take that for granted, because maintenance people think teachers have it made. You got all summer off. Teachers think maintenance people have it made. All you have to do is go in and do that. You're not doing lesson prep all night long, and you're not grading papers. When you shut the machine off, you go home. So you, in these meetings like this, you get each one to understand what each one is going through. There is no ideal situation. It's all work. And that's why I told the folks yesterday, I used to tell incoming freshmen, develop a work ethic. Because I used to tell incoming freshmen, some of you are so lazy you think manual labor is the president of Mexico. And I said, that's it. You'll find out something different. And one of the frustrating things in that is the mentality of they won't show up for work. How do we get people to be responsible in that? But think of ways that you can serve. Now, let me ask you, what are some ways that you serve your people in your role of responsibility? What are some ways that you do that? And we can learn from each other there. Just throw out a few ideas quickly. How can you, as an authority, serve those under you? Besides praying, besides giving special attention, what are some other ways? Recognition of higher management so they can see it. Yeah, recognition, where it's just mentioned, say, you know, so-and-so, we so much appreciate what's going on here. You know, most of you don't know what's happening, but I know what that person is going through during that time. And it's just a little mention, but it's like, they're not looking for that, but it sure helps. What are some other things?
Just a handwritten thank you note every now and then to the individual.
Just
Brief note.
Handwritten note, sometimes just a Snicker bar.
Yeah.
You know, just put a Snicker bar on the desk and And I know you're working hard. It's not unnoticed. I used to do a lot of things. I used to go to circulate through our departments. And I found if you keep maintenance happy, you can keep generally a happy atmosphere. Because when you study Korah, who did the hands-on work in Numbers 16, you get a griping soloist. Korah ended up with a 250-voice choir of gripers. And he took on the visible authority, Moses. He took on the anointed Aaron, and he took on the Almighty finally. And that's when God said, okay, enough is enough. I'm going to show you who really is in charge here. And so you got a chorus, a single Korah. What was it? And Moses said, are you not satisfied to do the service of the house of the Lord? Do you want the priesthood also? Discontentment with placement in corporate structure becomes that's why gifting is so important. When God gave gifts to the church, God gifted apostles and prophets for special situations. He gifted evangelists for particular focus to reach sinners. And he gave pastor teachers for saints to be fed and directed so they in turn can become those. Everybody needs to be evangelists. Everybody needs to be teachers and diligent. But the gifting of these people becomes very clearly straight in that way. So if you'll be a servant unto them. And we learn that way. Any other ideas quickly? Ask their opinion on something. Because that is a clear way. Hey, what do you think? We have a situation here. I always emphasize giving ownership to major decisions. If a department is going to be affected, I want the heads of that department feeling ownership in that decision, not passed down dictum for that decision. I saw a hand over here. Volunteer to work with them. Yeah, absolutely. Get involved. Sometimes you go in and lift the things that were necessary. One thing I appreciated Brother Steve Pettit did when he took the presidency, nobody knew who he was down at Bob Jones. He's unpacking cars with students. They don't even know who he is. Hauling stuff to their room. They didn't know who he was because he had not yet been introduced. And I thought, that's the kind of a mentality that goes on. Secondly, if you will answer them. And so this key year, share yourself with people. This is the principle of sharing. The key is sharing. To me, this is one of the hardest things of leadership when you have a larger group together, is to share yourself with people. There are certain people, you see them coming and you want to disappear. Because it's not going to be a good thing. And best thing to do is plant your feet, look them in the eyeball, say, I don't have time right now, but let's get an appointment to meet. And that's why I think the availability tours are so good. When I used to save myself a lot of time, when we had staff of 100 plus students staff on payroll, and there are so many things. You wake up with a $12 million budget on your head, and you're waking up with insurance programs and housing provisions, and yet you're trying to keep a big-term vision, and so people don't get hurt underneath, and you're thinking through all of these things. The tendency is just to hide. And I found when I was available, sharing, I'd go in a dining hall, snack shop, somebody would grab me with a question. It would probably save me a 2-hour involvement later. Because somebody quickly, but they say, well, at least there is approachability there that comes. But hard to deal with sharing yourself with people. In leadership, many times you get, and he knows with that, and I know Brother Tom does, you get letters and calls and emails, and as a Bible college president, you have hundreds of sending parents, hundreds of sending grandparents, hundreds of sending pastors, and everybody expects you to be exactly what they are. And you'll get these calls. And one really flicked my bick. I got a letter, and the pastor wanted to know my position on Santa Claus. I thought, boy, that's a biggie. And I dictated a letter. Jen Schmidt was my secretary. I said, he is an overweight man who has been very good to me through the years. And I said, don't send that. I said, that was flesh. And I said, that was flesh. Then I went and dug into Revelation about the ho-ho is the voice of many waters, and the buckle and the brass. And so I didn't do that either. I answered graciously. I know we need to stay focused, but Santa has never been one of the bigger pressures that I have faced in ministry. It's very hard to share yourself with people, but I'm finding availability makes people approachability. And when there's availability, there's approachability, and many times people, all they want to know is somebody cares. And if you communicate that much I care, it makes a humongous difference. And my wife used to always keep a list of everybody's birthdays of all of our staff and staff children, which got up into the hundreds actually, with 100 staff and then a wife and then some children. But she hand wrote birthday cards, every one she hand wrote for years. Everybody who had a birthday, whether it was a child or whether it was a staff member or whether it was a co-worker on the level of the administrative level, they got a birthday card from my wife, a handwritten birthday card. And you know what? That much I care. And 2 or 3 years later, people say, you know what really meant a lot? Just the fact that you remembered the birthday and you remembered to say a few key words, but it's not a major type thing. These are things that can help so much in this. Answer them. And then principle number 3, if you will speak good words to them. Principle here is speech or words. Dr. Warren Wiersbe wrote a set of devotional commentaries called the B series. And in his book of James, it was his Be Wise. In James chapter 3, Dr. Wiersbe said our tongue has 3 vital powers. Vital power number 1, the tongue has power to direct. And the 2 metaphors used there are the fig tree, the rudder on a ship, and the bit in the horse's mouth. And so the ship is turned, this humongous ship is turned by a tiny rudder compared to the size of the ship. But it turns the direction of that whole ship. And the bit in the horse's mouth, that's a tiny steel thing, but it turns the direction of that whole horse's body. And he was saying in James chapter 3, our tongue has a vital power to direct people. You ever realize that you can do that? I remember there was a boys' home right up near our campus in about 15 miles away, and the boys from the boys' home who were sent there for healing and help and try to heal their hearts of rebellion and so on, they would come to church. And there was one young man in that. I used to always try to mingle with those boys from the boys' home there. And this one guy had a mellow, you talk about a speaking voice. And I was telling Pastor yesterday morning, I said, I have never felt comfortable speaking. I had a Finnish brogue, horrible lisp, and tongue-tied. One of my brothers, and my daughter had to have the tongue clipped underneath, but the tongue-tied, but my lisping, when I speak, this is how I would speak. And so when I was in the woods, it didn't matter. That's why I planned to stay in logging. And I remember one of the speech ladies in school, in my high school, came and asked me in my senior year, would you mind if I recommended a state speech therapist to meet with you one time a week this year? And I said, I'm going to be in the woods. I said, the squirrels and hoodalls don't care what I sound like, so I'm really not interested. She said, well, I think it would help you. Because, and what really stunk was my name was Les. Let's say that I surrendered to preach the gospel. Pastor called me to do a prophecy series. Guess what the mark of the beast is, folks? 666. I can't preach that. Why not 999? Why couldn't it be 222? Why 666? So I had crippling fears. I really did. And I'm not exaggerating. My mouth is structured that way. I learned thousands of exercises to direct the air towards the front. It was a whole therapy that I did. And God was in that, looking down the road, years down the road. I personally was getting kind of a kick out of it. Count my teeth with the tip of my tongue, and it doesn't take near as long anymore. There aren't that many left. I could get a job at a Waffle House, actually, now. And but you know what I found with the speaking? And it was a crippling fear to me. It doesn't cost anything to do a direct. And so when I saw this guy, and I told this young man, I said, if I had your voice and you had a feather in your nose, we'd both be tickled. This was a teenage boy in the boys' home. I said, son, God gave you that voice. I said, I sound like sandpaper scraping on glass when I speak. Don't waste the gift that God has given to you. Well, this young man ended up coming to Northland, graduated, got graduate work, came back and taught Greek for us. He was graduating, getting his master's degree, and we were in robes. And he said, Doc O, there's something I never told you. He said, you stopped me in church one day, and you felt it important enough that I was important to you not to waste the voice God gave me. He said, that turned my whole direction, my whole thinking turned that day.
Good.
We hated to lose him as a Greek teacher, but he is in a very prosperous church plant in Moncton, New Brunswick. And I've been up there twice to preach in that church. Beautiful new facility, a church plant that was done there. And that young man, I'm telling you, his voice was like, but he is honoring God with that now. You know what? That 5-second comment, my twisted tongue was used to turn him a direction in his life. A thoughtful thing. Well, obviously, you've had that happen many times in your life. Secondly, Wiersbe said your tongue has power to destroy. And boy, how quickly we can be sarcastic. What's the root idea of sarcasm? It's cutting flesh. It's the sarks cutting. It's very cutting comments. That's what happened to Moses when he lost his temper in Numbers 20. Hear now, ye rebels. God said, that is not what I told you to do. Fire in its rightful place is very helpful. Fire out of its rightful place is very destructive. And James said that tongue is set on fire of hell. But if it's in its rightful place, fire is warming. And then last of all, he said the tongue has vital power to delight. And 2 metaphors were given for that. Fig tree and a fountain. Fig tree to the hungry soul, bubbling fountain to the thirsty soul. Speak good words unto them. How much does it cost you to stop someone briefly and say thank you for what you're doing? You can put words into writing and write a thank you. Have you ever gotten a thank you note from somebody or a note from someone? You look at it, see who wrote it. you read it, put it down, you pick it up and read it again. Next morning you get and read it again. You read it and reread it. Why? And you think that was so thoughtful. Words make a huge difference in our leadership influence. And we can either use words to direct them in a wrong way, or we can use our words as a pure delight to help people to be focused in the right way and focused in the right direction. And but what happened is the old men gave that counsel, and Rehoboam now met with the young men, and the young men said, "May your little finger be thicker than your father's loin. Pour it on. Don't get involved in that servant leadership stuff." I remember Dr. McLaughlin came to me one time in my office, and he said, "Read this letter." It came from the president of a mission board. And it said in the letter, "We are afraid that you are going to produce a bunch of wimps in fundamentalism with that servant leadership teaching." And then they named an older student, had graduated. He had gotten saved later in life, came as a married student, he and his wife and children. And I saw the name that they had. They had interviewed this guy, and he appeared way too meek. The guy was just a humble, feeling totally unworthy of having been saved, trained, loved the Lord with a passion. And they had interviewed this wimp. I looked at the name, I said, "Dr. McLaughlin, write the guy back, tell him not to worry about that wimp." I said, "You know what that wimp did?" That wimp came to me and said, "Doc O, God is calling us to South America. Would you meet me for prayer in the morning?" I met that wimp at 5:30 in the morning. We went up to a classroom. And you know what that wimp was doing? Praying and weeping tears on the chair as he was on his knees. "God, open the doors for us to go. And God, you make it possible." That was about 22 years ago or longer. And you know what? My wife and I just had dinner with that wimp and his wife a while back after years of prosperous ministry in South America. And I thought, no, servant leadership is not wimpy. If it is, then Jesus was a wimp. You study the kenosis doctrine in Philippians chapter 2, emptied himself and became a servant, humbled himself as a servant. And one of the attitudes that we must have in leadership, no matter what that is we must be able to be our servant. And we serve them, we answer them, and we speak good words. Young men met with him, said, "No way, don't go that route." And you see what happens in the unraveling of the leadership and the influence. And Solomon goes into disobedience, and Solomon goes into idolatry, and the consequence of all of the things that tumbled downhill. The nation of the south had to finally go into captivity. And that's what Tom mentioned on the restoring in Nehemiah and the book of Ezra. 3 principles: serving, sharing, speech. Any comments? Or any additional thoughts on this? We have time. I'm done with my thoughts. But I thought, actually I was flying to speak at an educator convention, and I was going to, one of the sessions I had was the banquet. I had another message. I was on the plane reading through, and I wrote this message down on the plane. How do you have a happy atmosphere? And naturally, when the taxation load became heavy again, things began to unravel. But this is what came out of that. And I thought that was kind of tucked away in that one little verse or 2 verses. So powerful. Additional thoughts, ideas, things that you would suggest in that way. Or maybe things you've seen happen in your own ministry of how God worked.
I think it's modeling the joy every day.
Yeah, modeling the joy in serving. Yeah, and that is, you're communicating through your spirit what that is. Tom, do you have any additional thought on that? Yes, go ahead.
Pastor was saying that not only modeling the joy, sharing the sorrow. many young men are troubled. It's difficult. This is so appropriate. But I'm reminded of Paul's words to Timothy. He said, I'm mindful of your tears. I know what you're going through. I understand. What you men are sharing with us is that we're mindful of your tears. We know what it is. That encouragement is also sharing that sorrow. And it is helpful. It's encouraging. And it's appreciated in that sense.
I was doing an educator convention in Indiana, and a man came up to me after a session. I did this session, just a brief session, and he said, my wife is a teacher. He said, I own a corporation in Indianapolis. And he said, I did not want to come tonight. I told my wife I have to speak to our staff tomorrow. And I don't have my material together yet. And he said, you gave it to me tonight. That's exactly what I'm giving our corporation tomorrow, to create that atmosphere.